The Lincoln High School hallway falls into stunned silence as a woman in a dark business suit strides through the entrance, flanked by federal agents displaying FBI credentials and emergency response badges. Sergeant Brian Donnelly's aggressive posture crumbles as he recognizes the black woman he dismissed as just another angry parent making excuses during the incident report 30 minutes earlier. "Good afternoon, officers and staff," Director Nicole Harper announces, her voice carrying unmistakable federal authority throughout the corridor. "I'm Director Nicole Harper, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Some of you may not recognize me without my official detail, as I've been responding as a concerned parent to reports that my daughter was assaulted by law enforcement at her school." Her eyes lock on at Donnelly, who's gone pale. "Sergeant Donnelly, I believe we need to discuss why you slammed my 14-year-old daughter Maya's head against a concrete wall, handcuffed her for resisting arrest during a minor dress code violation, and told school officials that kids like her need to learn respect for authority through physical consequences." The gathered staff and students freeze in recognition. The sergeant who 30 minutes ago had treated her like a powerless civilian now faces the FBI director whose daughter he brutalized. And federal civil rights charges are already being prepared. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. 4 hours earlier, FBI Director Nicole Harper had been reviewing counterterrorism briefings at the regional field office when she received the call that would force her to choose between operational security and protecting her daughter from institutional violence that threatened to destroy everything she had worked to build as both a federal law enforcement leader and a single mother. At 43, Harper had spent 19 years climbing through FBI ranks to become the youngest woman ever appointed as regional director, responsible for federal law enforcement operations across 6 states. Her appointment had been both recognition of her exceptional investigative skills and acknowledgement that the Bureau needed transformational leadership to address institutional problems that had damaged public trust and operational effectiveness. Harper was a devoted single mother to 14-year-old Maya, having raised her daughter alone since her husband's death in military service when Maya was 6. The balance between federal law enforcement responsibilities and active parenting had been challenging but rewarding, with Maya excelling academically while understanding that her mother's work protecting national security required significant sacrifice and dedication. Maya Harper was everything a federal law enforcement parent could hope for. Academically gifted with a 3.7 GPA, socially conscious through student government involvement, and mature beyond her years due to growing up in a household where integrity and justice weren't abstract concepts but daily operational requirements. She took pride in her mother's career while understanding that FBI work often required secrecy and absence during critical family moments. What neither Harper nor Maya had anticipated was that their suburban school district would expose Maya to the same police violence that plagued urban communities, hidden behind the veneer of school safety and resource officer programs that were supposed to protect rather than criminalize students. Sergeant Brian Donnelly had been with Westfield Police Department for 12 years, the last 4 assigned as supervisor of school resource officers after his patrol duties had generated excessive force complaints that administrators preferred to handle through reassignment rather than discipline. His transfer to school settings had been characterized as community policing rather than acknowledgement that his aggressive approach was inappropriate for civilian law enforcement. Donnelly had brought military-style tactics to educational environments, treating adolescent behavioral issues as law enforcement problems requiring physical control rather than educational guidance. His presence at Lincoln High School had transformed minor disciplinary situations into criminal justice encounters that traumatized students and created pipeline-to-prison dynamics in what should have been learning environments. The incident that would bring Director Harper into direct confrontation with police brutality began with Maya defending a classmate from what she perceived as discriminatory treatment during lunch period. Malik Thompson, Maya's friend and study partner, had been accused by cafeteria supervisor Mrs. Jennifer Walsh of cutting in line and speaking disrespectfully. Allegations that Maya had witnessed were false and motivated by Walsh's obvious irritation with black students' presence in integrated social settings. When Maya politely intervened to explain that Malik had been following cafeteria rules and speaking respectfully, Walsh had characterized it as gang behavior and summoned Sergeant Donnelly to handle what she described as coordinated disrespect requiring police intervention. Donnelly had arrived with the militarized mindset that characterized all his interactions with students, immediately escalating the situation by treating 14-year-olds as potential criminals rather than young people navigating social dynamics in educational settings. His training and experience had conditioned him to view any questioning of authority as threat requiring aggressive response. Ms. Carol Bennett, an English teacher with 23 years of experience, had been monitoring the cafeteria during lunch duty when she witnessed Donnelly's approach to what should have been routine teenage social interaction. She had watched him transform normal adolescent advocacy into criminal justice encounter within seconds, using force that would have been excessive against adult suspects, let alone children in school settings. Bennett had immediately begun recording with her cell phone, understanding that documentation would be crucial for protecting students from retaliation and ensuring accountability for what appeared to be criminal assault disguised as law enforcement procedure. The regional FBI field office had established protocols for protecting families of federal law enforcement personnel, including immediate notification systems when agents' children encountered law enforcement difficulties that might compromise operational security or family safety. Maya's incident had triggered these protocols while raising questions about whether local police were suitable for school environments. Deputy Director Scott Richardson had been monitoring routine security briefings when Harper's family emergency was reported through official channels. His immediate concern was operational security. If Harper's daughter was being targeted or harassed, it could indicate broader threats against federal law enforcement families that required comprehensive protective response. Director Harper's daughter has been assaulted by local police at her school, Richardson had reported to Assistant Director Martinez. We need to determine whether this represents targeted harassment of federal families or routine police brutality that happened to affect our personnel. The distinction was crucial for determining appropriate federal response. Personal family crisis versus institutional threat that endangered federal operations and personnel safety. Harper's decision to respond personally rather than sending subordinates had been calculated to demonstrate that federal law enforcement took protection of families seriously while avoiding appearance of federal overreach in local police matters. Her plan was to address the situation as concerned parent first, then escalate to federal authority if local accountability proved insufficient. What she was about to discover was that Sergeant Donnelly's violence against Maya represented systematic police brutality against students that required immediate federal intervention rather than gradual administrative correction, and that her daughter's assault was part of institutional pattern that demanded comprehensive reform rather than individual accountability. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Maya Harper was walking through Lincoln High School's main hallway toward her advanced placement biology class when she noticed the confrontation developing in the cafeteria that would transform her from honor student to victim of police brutality within minutes. Her friend Malik Thompson stood near the lunch line, while cafeteria supervisor Mrs. Jennifer Walsh accused him of cutting in line and using inappropriate language. Allegations that Maya had witnessed were completely false. Malik had been standing in the correct position and had spoken politely when asked to move by another student. Maya approached the situation with the conflict resolution skills her mother had taught her through years of discussing justice, fairness, and standing up for others when institutions failed to protect vulnerable people. Mrs. Walsh, Maya said respectfully, I was standing right here and saw the whole thing. Malik was in the right place and didn't say anything disrespectful. I think there might be a misunderstanding. Her intervention was polite, factual, and appropriate for a student advocate trying to prevent unfair treatment of a classmate. In functional school environments, such peer advocacy would be welcomed as evidence of positive social development and community responsibility. But Walsh interpreted Maya's factual correction as challenge to her authority that required aggressive response to maintain control over students she viewed as inherently problematic. "Young lady, this doesn't concern you," Walsh replied with obvious irritation. "Malik knows what he did, and your interference shows exactly the kind of disrespectful attitude that's becoming a problem with certain students." The phrase "certain students" carried clear racial coding that Maya recognized from her mother's work investigating civil rights violations, language designed to target minorities while maintaining plausible deniability about discriminatory intent. Maya maintained her respectful tone while refusing to abandon her friend. "Mrs. Walsh, I'm not being disrespectful. I'm just explaining what I saw because I want to make sure everyone gets treated fairly." Her continued advocacy for accuracy and fairness triggered Walsh's decision to escalate what should have been routine teenage social interaction into law enforcement encounter that would traumatize multiple students and expose systematic institutional violence. "That's enough," Walsh declared, reaching for her radio. "Security to the cafeteria immediately. We have gang behavior and coordinated disrespect that requires police intervention." The characterization of peer support as gang behavior revealed Walsh's racialized perception of black students' social interactions, while her call for police intervention demonstrated how quickly school personnel could transform educational environments into criminal justice settings. Sergeant Brian Donnelly arrived within 2 minutes, his aggressive posture and tactical equipment immediately changing the cafeteria atmosphere from social space to potential combat zone. His 12 years of experience had conditioned him to view all civilian encounters as potential threats requiring dominant force projection. "What's the situation?" Donnelly asked Walsh, his tone suggesting collaborative investigation rather than neutral assessment of alleged rule violations. Walsh's report was carefully constructed to justify police involvement. These two students were disrupting cafeteria operations, refusing to follow directions, and displaying coordinated, disrespectful behavior towards staff authority. The female student became confrontational when I attempted to address the male student's inappropriate conduct. Every element of her account was either false or deliberately misleading. Disrupting operations meant standing in line, refusing directions meant explaining their actual positions, and confrontational behavior meant politely providing factual information. Maya recognized that Walsh's false report was creating dangerous situation where a police officer was being given inaccurate information that could lead to unnecessary escalation and potential violence. "Officer, that's not what happened," Maya said calmly, using the respectful tone her mother had taught her for police encounters. "Malik was following cafeteria rules, and I was just explaining what I saw. Nobody was being disrespectful or disruptive." Her attempt to provide accurate information should have prompted Donnelly to investigate the conflicting accounts rather than automatically accepting staff narrative over student testimony. Instead, Donnelly interpreted Maya's factual correction as inappropriate challenge to police authority that required immediate physical response to establish dominance and control. "Young lady, when I'm talking to school staff about a situation, students don't interrupt with their version of events," Donnelly stated, his hand moving to his equipment belt in gesture designed to intimidate through implied threat of force. Ms. Carol Bennett, who had been approaching to provide teacher perspective on what she had witnessed, began discreetly recording when she recognized that Donnelly's aggressive posture suggested potential violence against students who had committed no violations. Maya maintained her composure while recognizing that situation was escalating beyond reasonable response to cafeteria interaction. "Officer, I wasn't interrupting. I was providing information about what actually happened so you could make accurate assessment." Her continued respectful but firm assertion of truth-telling rights triggered Donnelly's decision to use physical force against 14-year-old honor student whose only action had been defending friend and providing accurate information to authorities. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back," Donnelly ordered, pulling handcuffs from his belt despite having no legitimate grounds for arrest or detention. Maya's confusion was evident. "Officer, what law did I violate? What am I being arrested for?" Her reasonable questions about probable cause and legal justification enraged Donnelly, whose training and temperament had conditioned him to interpret any questioning of police authority as resistance requiring escalated force regardless of legal standards or constitutional protections. "You're under arrest for disorderly conduct and interference with school operations," Donnelly announced, grabbing Maya's arm with force intended to establish dominance rather than ensure compliance. When Maya instinctively pulled back from unexpected physical contact, Donnelly's response was immediate and devastating. He slammed her head against the concrete wall with sufficient force to cause immediate injury and trauma that would require medical treatment. The sickening sound of impact silenced the cafeteria as students watched in horror while their classmate was brutalized for defending friend and telling truth to authority. The immediate aftermath of Sergeant Donnelly's assault on Maya Harper demonstrated both the community horror at witnessing police violence against children and the institutional mechanisms that would attempt to protect the officer who had brutalized a 14-year-old honor student. Ms. Carol Bennett, still recording despite her shock, began shouting for help while maintaining her phone's focus on Maya, who lay motionless against the wall with blood visible from where her head had struck concrete. "I need the nurse. Officer down in the cafeteria. Student injured," Bennett called into her radio, her training as mandatory reporter overriding her fear of confronting police authority who had just committed assault in front of dozens of witnesses. Maya remained conscious but dazed, her mother's safety training helping her stay still and avoid further aggravating potential head injury, while Donnelly stood over her with handcuffs, apparently preparing to continue his arrest despite having just committed felony assault against a minor. Malik Thompson, traumatized by watching his friend brutalized for defending him, began crying while other students pulled out phones to record what they recognized as criminal violence disguised as law enforcement procedure. Officer Janet Cooper, Donnelly's partner who had been monitoring the situation from the hallway, entered the cafeteria and immediately recognized that the situation had escalated beyond any reasonable police response to school disciplinary issues. "Brian, what happened?" Cooper asked, but her question was directed toward understanding how to support her partner's actions rather than determining whether those actions had been appropriate or legal. Donnelly immediately began constructing the narrative that would protect him from accountability. Student became physically resistive during lawful arrest, required control techniques to ensure safety and compliance. Subject struck wall during struggle to avoid restraint. His characterization of assault as control techniques and victim-blaming language about Maya striking wall during struggle revealed the systematic dishonesty that police used to justify excessive force against civilians, particularly children who couldn't effectively challenge fabricated accounts. Principal Elizabeth Crane arrived at the cafeteria within minutes, her immediate concern being damage control for the school's reputation rather than student welfare or accountability for obvious police misconduct. "Sergeant Donnelly, what's the status here?" Crane asked, her tone suggesting administrative collaboration rather than independent investigation of potential criminal assault on school property. Donnelly's report to school administration was more detailed but equally fabricated. "We responded to reports of coordinated disruptive behavior by students who refused to comply with staff directions. When I attempted to address the situation, the female student became confrontational and physically resistive, requiring appropriate use of force to maintain order and safety." Crane accepted this narrative without questioning obvious inconsistencies or seeking witness testimony from students and staff who had observed the actual encounter rather than Donnelly's fabricated version. Nurse Linda Johnson arrived to find Maya sitting against the wall with obvious head trauma, her medical training immediately recognizing signs of concussion and potential serious injury requiring emergency medical evaluation. "Maya, can you tell me your name and what day it is?" Johnson asked, conducting basic neurological assessment while documenting visible injuries that would provide medical evidence of the assault. Maya's responses were appropriate but slow, indicating potential traumatic brain injury from having her head slammed against concrete wall by adult police officer who outweighed her by over 100 pounds. "I'm Maya Harper. It's Wednesday. "My head really hurts, and I feel dizzy," Maya replied, her symptoms consistent with concussion that required immediate hospital evaluation and potentially serious long-term medical monitoring. Johnson's documentation would become crucial evidence for both medical treatment and legal accountability. Patients show signs consistent with head trauma, including disorientation, dizziness, and visible contusion. Injury appears consistent with impact against hard surface. Recommend immediate emergency room evaluation. Meanwhile, Mrs. Susan Garcia, a parent volunteer who had been in the school during the incident, had witnessed the entire encounter and immediately contacted other parents about police violence against students that contradicted everything the school district claimed about student safety and resource officer programs. "I just watched a police officer slam a 14-year-old girl's head against a wall for defending her friend," Garcia told fellow parent advocates. "This wasn't law enforcement. This was child abuse with a badge. We need immediate community response and accountability." Her witness testimony would provide adult corroboration for student accounts that school administration and police would attempt to dismiss as unreliable or biased against authority. Principal Crane's priority was controlling information flow rather than ensuring student safety or police accountability. "Everyone needs to remain calm while we investigate what happened. Students should not be discussing this incident on social media or with outside parties until we have complete information." Her attempt to suppress witness testimony and public knowledge revealed institutional commitment to protecting police misconduct rather than protecting students from violence. Dr. James Murray, the vice principal who had been dealing with Maya's academic advancement and college preparation, arrived to find one of the school's most promising students being treated for head trauma caused by police assault. "Maya has been accepted to summer programs at 3 universities," Murray told Johnson quietly. "She's never had any disciplinary issues and volunteers for community service projects. This makes no sense as police response to cafeteria situation." His character testimony would provide educational context that contradicted any attempt to characterize Maya as problematic student who required aggressive police intervention. As school administrators attempted to control narrative and minimize accountability for obvious police brutality, none of them knew that Maya's mother was FBI director whose federal authority would soon transform their damage control efforts in a federal criminal investigation that would expose systematic institutional violence against students. The suburban school that thought local political connections protected them from accountability was about to discover that federal civil rights enforcement operated under different rules than municipal politics, and that brutalizing the daughter of federal law enforcement leadership would trigger consequences that their institutional protection couldn't prevent. While school administrators and police supervisors coordinated to minimize accountability for Sergeant Donnelly's assault on Maya Harper, the FBI's family protection protocols had triggered a comprehensive federal response that would converge on Lincoln High School with authority that transcended local institutional politics and police union protection. Deputy Director Scott Richardson received notification of Maya's assault through secure FBI family emergency channels while reviewing counterterrorism briefings at regional headquarters. The report indicated that Director Harper's daughter had been hospitalized following altercation with local law enforcement at educational facility, triggering protocols designed to protect federal families from targeted harassment or retaliation. Director Harper's 14-year-old daughter has been assaulted by local police during school incident, Richardson reported to FBI Assistant Director Lisa Martinez via secure communication. Preliminary reports suggest excessive force resulting in head trauma requiring emergency medical treatment. Martinez understood immediately that the incident represented potential federal crisis requiring both family protection and institutional accountability. "Scott, if local police are targeting federal families through violence against children, that's not just excessive force. That's potential domestic terrorism requiring comprehensive federal response." The intelligence assessment would determine whether Maya's assault represented random police brutality or coordinated attack against federal law enforcement leadership that endangered national security operations. FBI Technical Division began analyzing social media and communication intercepts to determine whether Maya's assault had been coordinated or spontaneous, while legal counsel reviewed federal statutes governing crimes against federal families and civil rights violations in educational settings. Meanwhile, at Lincoln High School, student witnesses who had recorded Donnelly's assault were facing pressure from administrators to delete footage and remain silent about what they had witnessed. Malik Thompson, whose defense by Maya had triggered the violent encounter, was called to Principal Crane's office and warned that spreading rumors about police procedures could result in disciplinary action that affects college applications and academic standing. The intimidation was designed to suppress evidence and protect institutional reputation rather than ensure student safety or police accountability. But several students had already shared footage through encrypted messaging platforms, understanding that adult authority figures who protected child abuse couldn't be trusted with evidence of their own misconduct. We need to make sure people see what really happened, Student Government President Zara Adams told classmates via secure group chat. Maya got hurt protecting Malik from false accusations, and now they're trying to cover it up. That's not right. The student coordination represented organic resistance to institutional cover-up attempts, demonstrating that young people understood justice and accountability even when adults prioritized self-protection over child welfare. Ms. Carol Bennett had been summoned to Principal Crane's office and instructed to delete her recording of Donnelly's assault, with implicit threats about contract renewal and teaching evaluations if she failed to comply with administrative directive. Carol, this incident has been blown out of proportion, Crane told her. Sergeant Donnelly used appropriate techniques for a resistant subject. Your recording could be misinterpreted and damage relationships between school and police that keep our students safe. Bennett's refusal to delete evidence would prove crucial for federal prosecution. Elizabeth, I recorded a police officer slamming a child's head against a wall. That's not appropriate technique. That's criminal assault. I'm keeping this recording for Maya's protection and any investigation that follows. Her professional integrity in protecting evidence despite administrative pressure demonstrated the individual courage that made institutional accountability possible when systems failed. Attorney Jerome Williams, a civil rights lawyer who specialized in police misconduct cases, had been contacted by Mrs. Garcia about potential federal civil rights violations at Lincoln High School. His experience with excessive force cases immediately recognized the incident's significance. Police assault against minor in educational setting triggers multiple federal statutes, Williams told Garcia during emergency consultation. If the victim sustained serious injury from head trauma, we're looking at potential federal prosecution under civil rights laws and crimes against children statutes. His legal analysis would provide foundation for federal intervention that local political protection couldn't prevent or control. Pastor Angela Davis, who led community advocacy for educational justice, began organizing parent response to police violence that contradicted everything the school district claimed about student safety and resource officer accountability. This assault represents systematic failure of policies that put armed officers in schools without adequate training, oversight, or accountability, Davis told emergency parent meeting. Maya's injury could have been prevented if school districts prioritized student welfare over police authority. Dr. Patricia Young, school board member who had been advocating for resource officer reform, immediately called for independent investigation and potential termination of police contracts that enabled violence against students. We cannot allow police officers to assault children on school property while administrators attempt to cover up criminal behavior, Young told fellow board members. This incident demands comprehensive review of police presence in educational settings. At Westfield Police Department, Chief Daniel Rodriguez was coordinating with Mayor's office and city attorney to minimize legal liability and public relations damage from Donnelly's assault, rather than ensuring accountability for obvious misconduct. We need to control narrative before this becomes media circus about police brutality, Rodriguez told senior staff. Donnelly followed department protocols for resistant subjects. Any injuries were accidental result of suspect's failure to comply with lawful arrest. The institutional protection of criminal assault demonstrated how police departments prioritized officer protection over public safety and constitutional compliance. As multiple agencies and advocacy groups documented Donnelly's assault, while school and police officials attempted to suppress accountability, none of them knew that Maya's mother possessed federal authority that would make their local protection mechanisms irrelevant and expose their cover-up attempts to federal prosecution for obstruction of justice. Director Nicole Harper stood in Westfield General Hospital's emergency room, her FBI training helping her remain composed while processing both maternal fear for Maya's welfare and professional recognition that local authorities were attempting systematic cover-up of federal crimes against her family. Maya had been diagnosed with concussion and required overnight observation for potential complications from traumatic brain injury, her medical condition providing concrete evidence of the excessive force that Sergeant Donnelly and school administrators were attempting to minimize as routine police procedure. "Mom, I did everything right," Maya told her mother while nurses monitored her neurological responses. "I was polite. I told the truth. I followed all your rules about police encounters. But Sergeant Donnelly still hurt me because he was angry that I defended Malik and wouldn't accept his false narrative." Her assessment demonstrated mature understanding of institutional dynamics while providing firsthand testimony about discriminatory enforcement that targeted children for asserting rights rather than submitting to authority. Harper's secure communication device displayed priority message from Deputy Director Richardson. Family protection teams en route. Authorization granted for full federal response. Local authorities attempting evidence suppression and narrative control. She activated federal emergency protocols. Copy. Victim stable, but requires ongoing medical monitoring. Local police and school administration coordinating cover-up attempts. Request immediate federal intervention with full authority. Dr. Maria Santos, the emergency physician treating Maya, provided medical documentation that would be crucial for federal prosecution. Patient presents with concussion consistent with head impact against hard surface. Injury pattern indicates significant force applied by external source rather than accidental contact. This level of trauma requires force that exceeds reasonable restraint techniques for minor. Her clinical assessment eliminated any possibility of characterizing Maya's injuries as accidental or proportionate to alleged resistance. Principal Crane arrived at the hospital with District Superintendent Patricia Flynn, their presence designed to demonstrate administrative concern while actually gathering intelligence about Harper's intentions and legal plans. "Mrs. Harper, we want to assure you that Lincoln High School takes student safety very seriously," Crane began with rehearsed sympathy. "We're conducting thorough investigation of today's incident to ensure all procedures were followed appropriately." Harper recognized the language immediately. Institutional protection disguised as accountability, designed to delay and deflect rather than address obvious criminal behavior. "Principal Crane," Harper replied calmly, "my daughter suffered traumatic brain injury from having her head slammed against concrete wall by police officer. That's not procedural issue requiring internal investigation. That's federal crime requiring criminal prosecution. Her direct identification of criminal liability should have prompted immediate cooperation and accountability. But Crane continued the administrative deflection that Harper recognized as obstruction of justice. "Mrs. Harper, while we understand your concerns, Sergeant Donnelly followed established protocols for managing resistant students. Maya's injuries appear to have resulted from her failure to comply with lawful police directions rather than excessive force. The victim-blaming narrative and false characterization of assault as established protocols demonstrated exactly the institutional conspiracy that federal prosecution would target." At 4:47 p.m., the federal response team arrived at Westfield General Hospital. FBI agents, DOJ civil rights attorneys, and federal marshals with authority to assume jurisdiction over crimes against federal families and civil rights violations in educational settings. Richardson approached Harper with professional update. "Director, federal team is in position. We have witness statements, video evidence, and medical documentation supporting prosecution under multiple federal statutes. Local authorities have been attempting evidence suppression and witness intimidation. Harper made her strategic decision. Scott, I'm revealing my federal authority and assuming direct command of this investigation. Maya's assault represents systematic institutional violence that requires comprehensive federal response rather than local administrative handling. Superintendent Flynn, observing the federal presence with growing alarm, attempted to position herself as cooperative authority. Director Harper, I want to assure you that our district is committed to full cooperation with any federal investigation. Student safety is our highest priority. Her sudden deference revealed recognition that local political protection was irrelevant when federal law enforcement assumed jurisdiction. DOJ Attorney Karen Walsh served formal notification. Principal Crane, Superintendent Flynn, you're being notified that this incident is now under federal investigation for civil rights violations, assault against minor, and potential conspiracy to obstruct justice. Any further attempts to influence witnesses or suppress evidence will result in additional federal charges. The legal framework made clear that administrative damage control would be treated as criminal obstruction rather than legitimate institutional response. Harper addressed the assembled hospital staff and school officials with authority that eliminated any confusion about jurisdictional control. Everyone here needs to understand that what happened to my daughter represents federal crimes that will be prosecuted to the full extent of federal law. Sergeant Donnelly's assault on Maya violated her civil rights and constitutes criminal battery against minor. School administrators' attempts to cover up this assault constitute obstruction of federal investigation. Federal Marshal David Chun announced immediate action. Sergeant Brian Donnelly is being placed under federal arrest for deprivation of rights under color of law and assault causing bodily injury to minor. Principal Elizabeth Crane is being detained for questioning regarding potential conspiracy to obstruct justice and tampering with evidence. The swift federal intervention demonstrated that local institutional protection was powerless against federal authority when crimes against federal families triggered comprehensive federal response. As local officials who had been attempting to control narrative suddenly faced federal prosecution, Harper understood that Maya's assault would catalyze comprehensive reform of police presence in schools and accountability for institutional violence that targeted children. The emergency room at Westfield General Hospital became the epicenter of a power reversal that would redefine police accountability in educational settings and demonstrate how quickly local institutional protection could crumble when federal authority intervened to protect civil rights and family welfare. Sergeant Brian Donnelly, Director Harper announced, her voice carrying unmistakable federal law enforcement authority throughout the hospital corridor. You assaulted my 14-year-old daughter Maya by slamming her head against a concrete wall, causing traumatic brain injury that required emergency medical treatment. That assault constitutes federal civil rights violation and criminal battery against a minor. Donnelly, who had arrived at the hospital to complete incident paperwork, stood paralyzed as the full implications of his actions became clear. The child he had brutalized was the daughter of FBI director whose federal authority would ensure criminal prosecution rather than administrative protection. Ma'am, I had no way of knowing Maya was your daughter, Donnelly stammered, his attempt at damage control revealing complete failure to understand that familial relationship was irrelevant to constitutional protections and criminal liability. Harper's response eliminated any possibility of hiding behind ignorance. Sergeant Donnelly, my daughter's parentage is irrelevant to the fact that you committed criminal assault against 14-year-old honor student whose only actions were defending friend from false accusations and providing accurate information to authority figures. Your violence would have been equally criminal if directed against any child. The distinction between failing to recognize federal connection and systematically brutalizing children made Donnelly's actions indefensible under any professional or legal standard. Principal Crane, realizing her administrative cover-up attempts had targeted federal law enforcement family, tried to distance herself from Donnelly's assault. Director Harper, I want to clarify that school administration did not authorize or approve Sergeant Donnelly's use of force. We were simply gathering information about a complex situation involving multiple perspectives. Her attempt to characterize obstruction of justice as information gathering collapsed under scrutiny from DOJ Attorney Walsh. Principal Crane, you instructed witnesses to delete video evidence, threatened students with disciplinary action for discussing the assault, and coordinated with police to suppress testimony. That's not information gathering. That's criminal conspiracy to obstruct federal investigation. Deputy Director Richardson provided federal law enforcement perspective. Director Harper, preliminary investigation confirms systematic pattern of excessive force by school resource officers, with particular targeting of minority students. Maya's assault represents escalation of institutional violence rather than isolated incident. The intelligence assessment transformed individual misconduct into evidence of systematic civil rights violations requiring comprehensive federal intervention. Ms. Carol Bennett, who had courageously maintained her video evidence despite administrative pressure, approached Harper with additional documentation. Director Harper, I recorded Sergeant Donnelly's assault on Maya and have statement from multiple student witnesses. The assault was unprovoked and excessive by any standard of appropriate police behavior. Her professional integrity in protecting evidence provided crucial foundation for federal prosecution that local authorities had attempted to suppress. Malik Thompson, whose defense by Maya had triggered the violent encounter, was brought to the hospital by his parents after learning about federal investigation. Director Harper, Maya got hurt protecting me from false accusations. She stood up for what was right even when adults were lying about what happened. Sergeant Donnelly hurt her because she wouldn't accept his false narrative. His testimony provided victim impact evidence while demonstrating the courage that 14-year-olds showed when adults failed to protect them from institutional violence. Dr. James Murray, Maya's vice principal who had arrived to check on her condition, provided educational context that contradicted any attempt to characterize her as a problematic student. Director Harper, Maya is one of our most outstanding students. Honor roll, advanced placement courses, community service, leadership activities. She's never had disciplinary issues and represents exactly the kind of student we want to develop and protect. Federal Marshal Chun announced immediate accountability. Sergeant Donnelly, you're under federal arrest for deprivation of civil rights under color of law, assault causing bodily injury to minor, and criminal battery. Principal Crane, you are being detained for obstruction of justice and conspiracy to violate civil rights. The swift federal action demonstrated that local political protection was irrelevant when federal crimes against children triggered comprehensive federal response. Chief Rodriguez, who had been coordinating damage control with city officials, attempted to minimize departmental liability. Director Harper, Sergeant Donnelly's actions do not represent department policy or training. If his use of force was inappropriate, that reflects individual failure rather than institutional problems. Harper's response exposed systematic institutional failures. Chief Rodriguez, Sergeant Donnelly was assigned a school setting after excessive force complaints during patrol duties. Your department placed problematic officer in environment with children rather than addressing his pattern of violence. That's institutional enabling of child abuse rather than individual misconduct. Attorney Jerome Williams, representing community interests, approached federal officials with broader accountability concerns. Director Harper, Maya's assault is part of systematic pattern affecting multiple families. We have documentation of excessive force by school resource officers that has traumatized children and created hostile educational environment for minority students. Superintendent Flynn, facing potential federal prosecution for civil rights violations, made final attempt to minimize institutional culpability. Director Harper, if our policies enabled inappropriate police behavior that reflects administrative oversight rather than intentional discrimination. We're committed to comprehensive reform ensuring student safety. Harper's response was definitive. Superintendent Flynn, administrative oversight that enables systematic assault of children constitutes institutional civil rights violation. Your policies didn't accidentally create violence. They deliberately prioritized police authority over student welfare while suppressing accountability for obvious criminal behavior. As federal agents escorted Donnelly and detained school officials for questioning, The transformation was complete. Local authorities who had protected police violence against children now faced federal prosecution under the authority of parent whose commitment to justice exceeded their institutional self-protection. The morning following Sergeant Donnelly's arrest, Director Harper convened an emergency federal accountability conference at Lincoln High School's auditorium, ensuring that the response to police violence against students would be public, transparent, and comprehensive rather than handled through closed federal proceedings that might minimize community impact. The auditorium was packed with 800 students, parents, teachers, and community members who had heard various accounts of Maya's assault and understood that fundamental changes in school safety and police accountability were about to be announced. Yesterday, my daughter Maya was assaulted by a police officer who slammed her head against a concrete wall for defending her friend and telling the truth to authority figures. Harper began, addressing an audience that included State Education Commissioner Patricia Williams and federal judicial oversight officials. This assault represents systematic institutional failure, not just individual misconduct, but coordinated protection of violence against children that enabled years of trauma and civil rights violations. State Education Commissioner Williams acknowledged the severity of institutional problems. Director Harper, the state deeply regrets that educational oversight mechanisms failed to identify and address systematic police violence despite clear evidence and multiple complaints. We're committed to comprehensive reform ensuring student safety and constitutional compliance. Her statement represented recognition that state educational authority had enabled rather than prevented violence against children. Superintendent Flynn, facing federal prosecution, announced immediate institutional changes. Effective today, all school resource officer contracts are suspended pending federal review. We're implementing comprehensive student protection policies and federal oversight of any security personnel assigned to educational settings. The swift policy response demonstrated recognition that protecting violent officers would trigger federal receivership that could strip local control over educational operations. Pastor Angela Davis, representing affected families, addressed federal officials. We appreciate swift accountability, but families in this community have been reporting police violence against students for years while being dismissed by school administration that prioritized officer protection over child welfare. What systematic changes will prevent future violence rather than just responding after children are traumatized? Her challenge forced authorities to address whether reforms would be comprehensive or merely reactive to federal intervention. Malik Thompson, whose defense by Maya had triggered the assault, provided student perspective with remarkable maturity. Maya got hurt protecting me because adults were lying about what happened. She showed courage when grown-ups failed to protect truth and justice. Sergeant Donnelly heard her because she wouldn't accept false accusations and demanded fairness. His testimony demonstrated that 14-year-olds understood justice and accountability better than adults who prioritized institutional protection over child welfare. DOJ Attorney Walsh announced comprehensive federal investigation. We're reviewing every use of force incident involving school resource officers over the past 5 years, with particular attention to cases involving minority students. Any officer showing patterns of excessive force will face federal prosecution, and affected families will receive federal compensation for civil rights violations. The comprehensive review demonstrated federal commitment to addressing systematic violence rather than just punishing individual perpetrators. Ms. Bennett, who had courageously documented Maya's assault despite administrative pressure, was publicly recognized. Ms. Bennett risked her career to protect evidence of criminal assault against child. Her professional integrity made federal prosecution possible and will be rewarded through witness protection and advancement opportunities within federal educational administration. The public recognition encouraged other educators to document misconduct rather than protecting institutional comfort through silence. Dr. Murray provided educational testimony about Maya's character. Maya represents everything we want students to develop: academic excellence, moral courage, leadership integrity. Her assault for defending classmate and asserting truth demonstrates institutional failure that traumatizes our best students while protecting adults who abuse authority. Federal oversight mechanisms were announced that would monitor police interactions with students, mandatory body cameras for all school security, automatic federal review triggered by any use of force against minors, and anonymous reporting systems for students and families to flag potentially violent encounters. Inspector General Richardson outlined broader accountability measures. We're expanding this investigation to review school resource officer programs nationwide for similar patterns of violence. Any jurisdiction showing statistical evidence of excessive force against students will face federal oversight and potential prosecution of responsible personnel. The Accountability Conference concluded with concrete structural changes: federal monitoring for 3 years, mandatory constitutional compliance training for all school security personnel, revised evaluation criteria that weighted student safety equally with disciplinary statistics, and civilian oversight with authority to investigate violent patterns. Sergeant Donnelly was subsequently charged with federal civil rights violations and assault causing bodily injury to a minor, facing potential 15-year sentence that established precedent for treating violence against students as serious federal crimes worthy of harsh punishment. Sergeant Donnelly's assault on Maya Harper demonstrates complete failure of character and judgment that make him unfit for any position involving authority over children, federal prosecutor Michael Stevens stated. His use of force against 14-year-old honor student violated every principle that law enforcement exists to protect. Chief Rodriguez faced federal investigation for failing to address Donnelly's pattern of excessive force. His career ending through failure to maintain constitutional policing standards that had enabled systematic violence against students. The accountability process concluded with systematic changes: federal oversight for indefinite period, quarterly civil rights audits, mandatory bias training with testing requirements, and automatic federal prosecution triggered by any use of force against students showing discriminatory patterns. As the conference ended, students throughout Lincoln High approached Harper to express gratitude for federal intervention that school administration had failed to provide despite years of documented violence. "Thank you for showing that even police officers face consequences when they hurt kids," Student Government President Zara Adams told Harper. "We knew Sergeant Donnelly was dangerous, but adults protected him until he hurt someone whose mom had power to demand justice." Harper's response emphasized collective responsibility. "Change happened because students like you had courage to document violence, and teachers like Ms. Bennett protected evidence despite institutional pressure. My authority only mattered because good people provided truth that made federal prosecution possible." Over the following 12 weeks, Lincoln High School and the broader Westfield School District underwent the most comprehensive transformation in their institutional history, implementing changes that would serve as a national model for eliminating police violence in educational settings while maintaining student safety through constitutional means. The Federal School Safety Commission, established under Department of Education and DOJ Joint Authority, was directed by former federal prosecutor Dr. Angela Martinez, whose expertise in civil rights law and educational administration made her uniquely qualified to rebuild school security systems that had systematically failed to protect students from institutional violence. "We're not just removing violent officers," Dr. Martinez explained during mandatory training attended by all 247 school security personnel in the district. "We're building safety systems that protect students through education and support rather than intimidation and violence. Every interaction with students will be documented, reviewed, and evaluated for constitutional compliance and educational effectiveness." The training emphasized de-escalation and student development rather than law enforcement tactics, using analysis of Donnelly's assault to demonstrate how violence undermined both student safety and educational mission. Principal Crane's replacement, Dr. Sarah Kim, implemented revolutionary accountability measures throughout the school system. Every security interaction with students was now recorded and tracked demographically, with monthly reports showing disciplinary rates by racial category and incident type. Any personnel showing patterns of disproportionate force faced mandatory review, retraining, and potential removal. Student safety requires protection from violence, not exposure to it, Dr. Kim explained to the school board. When security personnel use force against children, They create trauma rather than safety. Data-driven accountability ensures that student protection is measurable rather than rhetorical. The statistical monitoring made violence against students organizationally difficult to hide and personally costly to perpetrate. Director Harper worked with Department of Education civil rights experts to develop the Lincoln Protocol, comprehensive procedures for identifying and addressing violence against students before it escalated to traumatic assault requiring federal prosecution. Schools exist to nurture and protect children, Harper explained during her testimony to Congress about educational safety. When school personnel assault students, they violate the most fundamental trust that families place in educational institutions. Federal oversight isn't interference with local education. It's protection of children's rights to learn without fear of institutional violence. Her framework elevated student protection from administrative concern to constitutional imperative that superseded local educational autonomy. The Student Safety Commission, established with authority independent of school administration, included student representatives, parents, child development experts, and civil rights attorneys with power to investigate violent incidents, review security policies, and recommend personnel changes including termination for constitutional violations. Maya Harper, whose courage in defending Malik had triggered comprehensive reform, served as student representative despite her young age, her experience providing crucial insight into how institutional violence affected children's educational experiences and psychological development. Students know which adults are safe and which ones are dangerous, Maya told the commission during its first public hearing. When we have official ways to report violence and know that good adults will protect us from bad ones, school becomes safer for everyone. Her voice and oversight ensured that reforms addressed actual student experiences rather than adult assumptions about what children needed for safety and learning. Ms. Bennett's documentation training program received federal funding to teach educators nationwide how to protect students through evidence collection and institutional accountability, using her experience exposing Donnelly's assault as model for professional integrity under pressure. Educators have moral and legal obligations to protect students from violence, Bennett explained during national training conferences. That protection requires documenting abuse and challenging institutional cover-ups rather than enabling harm through silence. The educational approach recognized that ending violence against students required changing professional culture rather than just individual behavior. Sergeant Donnelly had been convicted on federal charges and sentenced to 12 years in federal prison, the longest sentence ever imposed for police violence against students, establishing precedent that assault of children carried enhanced penalties reflecting their vulnerability. Children deserve maximum protection from violence by authority figures, Federal Judge Patricia Clark stated during sentencing. Sergeant Donnelly's assault on Maya Harper represents the most serious abuse of power imaginable, using police authority to traumatize child for asserting constitutional rights. The harsh sentence deterred similar violence while validating federal commitment to protecting students through serious criminal consequences. The 43 students who had experienced excessive force from school resource officers over 3 years received comprehensive remediation, expunged disciplinary records, trauma counseling, educational support services, and financial compensation for civil rights violations. Data analysis 18 months into reforms showed remarkable improvements. Use of force incidents against students decreased by 94% district-wide, with complete elimination of racial disparities in disciplinary actions. Student satisfaction with school safety increased dramatically, while academic performance improved as children focused on learning rather than avoiding institutional violence. Constitutional compliance enhanced rather than hindered educational effectiveness, Superintendent Flynn's replacement acknowledged during educational leadership conferences. When students feel safe from violence, they engage more effectively in learning. Protecting civil rights created better educational outcomes for everyone. The statistical validation demonstrated that student safety and constitutional compliance were mutually reinforcing rather than competing priorities. 18 months after Sergeant Donnelly's assault on Maya Harper, Director Harper returned to Lincoln High School for the first annual Student Rights and Educational Safety Day, a celebration of the comprehensive reforms that had transformed the institution from a place where children face police violence into a model of constitutional educational protection. The transformation was evident throughout the campus. Hallways that had previously felt militarized under resource officer programs now featured student art, peer mediation centers, and educational displays about civil rights and constitutional protections. The atmosphere of fear and surveillance had been replaced by mentorship programs, restorative justice initiatives, and collaborative learning environments. Dr. Sarah Kim greeted Harper with visible pride in the institutional change her leadership had guided under federal oversight. Director Harper, I want to show you what constitutional education looks like when student protection is embedded in every aspect of school operations. She displayed comprehensive safety data that had become publicly available through monthly transparency reports, reforms that allowed families, students, and oversight bodies to monitor whether school personnel were protecting rather than harming children. The data showed complete elimination of violence against students while maintaining effective disciplinary systems. When schools operate to protect students rather than control them, every outcome improves, Kim explained. Children learn better when they feel safe. Teachers are more effective when they nurture rather than intimidate, and families trust institutions that demonstrate genuine commitment to child welfare. Maya Harper, now 16 and serving as the state's first student civil rights ambassador, had not only recovered from her traumatic brain injury, but had become a powerful advocate for constitutional protections in educational settings. "Mom, I want to show you something," Maya said, leading Harper to a display case containing Sergeant Donnelly's original assault report alongside the video evidence and federal investigation findings that had exposed his lies. "We keep this as a reminder that authority figures can abuse their power and lie about it," Maya explained to visiting educators from other districts. "But we also keep it to show that truth and federal accountability are stronger than violence and cover-ups when people have courage to demand justice." Her mature perspective on institutional accountability reflected how personal trauma had been transformed into systemic understanding of civil rights protection. Ms. Bennett, whose courageous documentation had been crucial for exposing the assault, now directed the National Teacher Protection Institute, training educators to recognize and report violence against students despite institutional pressure. "Recording Sergeant Donnelly's assault changed my understanding of professional responsibility," Bennett told conferences attended by thousands of educators. "Protecting students from violence isn't optional courtesy. It's a legal obligation that requires courage to challenge authority when authority becomes abusive." Her transformation from individual teacher to national advocate demonstrated how personal integrity could catalyze institutional reform. The Federal Schools Safety Office had expanded Lincoln's protocols to monitor educational institutions in all 50 states, using statistical analysis and student feedback to identify violence before it escalated to traumatic assault requiring federal prosecution. Malik Thompson, whose defense by Maya had triggered the comprehensive reforms, graduated as valedictorian and received full scholarship to study civil rights law, his academic success demonstrating how protecting students from violence enhanced rather than hindered educational achievement. Sergeant Donnelly, meanwhile, had served 4 years of his 12-year sentence when he was killed by another inmate who learned that Donnelly had assaulted children. The prison violence highlighted how even criminal populations viewed attacks on children as particularly heinous. His death was extensively covered in law enforcement publications as demonstration of how violence against children could destroy perpetrators' lives, reinforcing deterrent effects for other officers who might consider whether assaulting students was worth personal and professional risks. On Harper's final evening at Lincoln High, she met with students whose courage in documenting and reporting Donnelly's assault had made federal accountability possible despite institutional attempts to suppress evidence. "You proved that young people can challenge systematic violence when they have evidence, integrity, and federal support," Harper told them during an informal gathering in the auditorium where federal accountability had been announced. Maya spoke for her classmates. "Mom, you showed us that civil rights protection isn't just legal theory. It's practical reality when federal authorities have courage to prosecute officials who think their positions make them untouchable. As Harper returned to her federal duties, she carried evidence that American educational institutions could evolve beyond their history of violence when leadership prioritized constitutional compliance over institutional convenience. Lincoln High School now stood as proof that schools could maintain safety and discipline without violence, that federal accountability enhanced rather than hindered educational effectiveness, and that protecting students' civil rights created stronger learning environments rather than weaker authority structures. Most importantly, the school demonstrated that transformation required both removing individual violent actors and building systems that prevented abuse, empowered students to report misconduct, and prioritized child welfare over adult authority. The FBI director, who had been dismissed as just another angry parent, now left behind institutions where parental concerns were taken seriously, where student protection was prioritized over officer convenience, and where educational authority served child development rather than adult control. That transformation, from institutional violence to constitutional protection, from student fear to student empowerment, from cover-up culture to accountability systems, represented the kind of systematic change that made educational institutions serve their actual purpose of nurturing young people rather than traumatizing them. And it began with one mother's refusal to accept that her daughter's assault was acceptable, combined with federal authority to ensure that constitutional protections applied to children regardless of their parents' position or power. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.